Hi, I'm James Howell, and in this video we are going to look at narrative design from Metal Gear Solid 2, an old favorite. I am a games writer and narrative designer. If you play VR games, you might have played something that I was a writer and narrative designer for, and if you don't play VR games, you might have played something that I had a hand in localizing, one way or another, quite some time ago. That's a pretty appropriate spread of titles, actually, because we're going to mash those up and take a look at the narrative design of the VR missions in Metal Gear Solid 2. To proceed on that front, we need to have a couple of things in place. First, what are the VR missions in MGS2? It's been a while since the game was released, kind of a niche feature, so we should refresh ourselves. Second, what is narrative design, which is a very big question with a lot of different answers, and today we're going to give one. And that leads us to our landing place. How does narrative design show up in a feature that is so gameplay focused as the VR missions in MGS2? So I'm going to switch to a better microphone and let's be on our way.
Metal Gear Solid 2's VR missions are an expansion on the main campaign. They are mini-levels that focus on the game's core systems with unique restrictions. They limit you to specific weapons, you have to complete a level under specific conditions, you have to use normally optional interactions like hold-ups, and so on. The Metal Gear games famously let players approach challenges with whatever strategies they want, so the arcade-like constraints here are unique for the series. And within these arcade-like constraints, we find solid narrative design. So, what is narrative design? There are maybe as many definitions of this as there are narrative designers, but I will give you mine. Narrative design is the strategy that a developer uses to make a game's systems, interactions, and aesthetics meaningful. Narrative designers need to know relevant developer tools and production processes, but they are fundamentally concerned with meaning. And they must communicate meaning through an experience. A great narrative designer will accomplish this using every available part of a game. Now, that's very high level, and necessarily so, because narrative design feels different depending upon the genre and the game's placement within that genre. With that in mind, what the VR missions are and what narrative design is for the purposes of this video, what is narrative design in MGS2's VR missions? This is a two-part answer. For part one, we'll answer what are the VR missions' systems and interactions, what are our narrative tools. Part 2, what narrative elements appear in the VR missions to contextualize those systems and interactions. So part 1. Systems and interactions include enemy behavior, like the number and placement of guards, their walk speed, their vision distance, the damage that they deal, their health. There's also loadout, your available verbs, how you can alter your character, like with a cardboard box or healing items, and how you can impact the world around you, like with guns and different weapons. And the third major consideration here is the high scores, how the game assesses your decisions in an objective way. This is not the subjective reward of emergent gameplay. Different factors feed into this, like time spent on the level, enemy kills, ammo remaining. Each level has its own high score, and each level has a different high score per playable character.
Congrats, Snake!
So let's box that up and put that aside and ask what narrative elements appear. The biggest thing, characters. You can play as Raiden with a sword, Solid Snake, Pliskin, which is Snake's disguise, Snake in a James Bond tuxedo, Metal Gear Solid 1 Snake, also Naked Raiden in a gimmick mode, poor guy. These are difficulty modes. Raiden's missions are very easy, and MGS1 Snake's are basically European extreme. Narrative design synthesizes these two things, mechanics and characters. The VR missions configure each challenge differently around each character. The high scores for each character vary, so the end result is the VR missions objectively reward players who use those loadouts and the optimal strategies, which organically leads players to roleplay those characters. Now we're in the thick of it, and we can look at the game and the characters themselves. The best place to start is the beginning. The first interactions form a contract with the player. They set the expectations for what success should feel like. So we will look at the target behaviors asked of a new player unfamiliar with, game-breaking speedrun strategies for each character in the first level of Eliminate All. We begin with Raiden. To get the high score, the player needs to take down the guard non-lethally. Raiden's starting weapon is lethal, but the tranquilizing M9 is right next to his spawn point. The guard is slow, and we have a big window to knock this guy out.
Nice work.
The target behavior is slow and observant decision-making with a lot of room for failure. And I can think of few better descriptions of Raiden's status as a novice. Next up is Blade Raiden. Blade Raiden is still Raiden, but it's another side of him, closer to his more brutal Jack the Ripper persona. Blade Raiden is equipped with only a sword. Non-lethal is still the way to go, so the player can adjust the sword so Raiden smacks the guard with the flat of the blade rather than cut him with the edge.
Nice work.
The target behavior for this high score is aggressive, both in speed and in proximity to the enemy. There's no safe distance. That's a pretty good snapshot of Raiden as the hot-headed Jack the Ripper. X-Raiden doesn't have an Eliminate All mode, so we're going to set it aside for now. It is in the game, so we're going to come back to it once the broader points about target behaviors, roleplay, and narrative design have been made. Next up is Metal Gear Solid 2 Snake. The guard is faster, and Snake needs a non-lethal takedown to get the high score. You have to play strategically and quickly to get the M9, and that puts Snake in this cubby when the guard turns. Snake can then hold him up and take him down.
Congrats, Snake.
The target behaviors for the high score are patience, using the level design to your advantage, and a quick strike. Very much the good guy stealth that we've come to expect of Solid Snake in his aging years. Next up is Snake as Pliskin. This is a higher risk version of MGS2 Snake. You have to get closer to the guard to grab the M9, and the target behavior, the behavior that's going to clear that high score, it expects you to lean into the risk and jump the guard, rather than wait for an opportunity to open up as it had with MGS2 Snake.
Congrats, Snake.
So Pliskin runs toward danger. He's like MGS2 Snake, but more aggressive. The target behavior isn't about finding an opening, it's about creating one. Next up is Tuxedo Snake. Snake has 2 tranquilizer shots, so the player has to make them count. To clear the high score, Snake does not need to move as quickly here as he had as Pliskin. So the target behavior is patience, observation, finesse, and a quick strike. As we saw in the menu, Tuxedo Snake is restricted to non-lethal weapons. There's no USP, no SOCOM, or anything like that. It's a fine example of how the VR missions lean into the arcadey right way to solve problems, rather than lean on the campaign's constant variety and emergent gameplay. Finally, we have MGS1 Snake. Super interesting, especially compared to everything we've seen before. Snake starts far away from the M9. If the player bolts for it and jumps the guard after getting the M9, they'll get a score that is extremely close to the high score, but usually not quite there.
Freeze. You know what you're doing.
That's a quick playthrough, and still 26 points shy of that high score. The player can surpass the high score by foregoing the M9 entirely, holding up the guard and choking him out non-lethally.
Freeze.
The target behavior for the high score is stealth, finesse, aggression, and foregoing weapons entirely. As his old buddy said, hand to hand, it is the basis of all combat. Now let's make a checklist of the character traits implied by those strategies, which are conditioned by enemy behavior, loadout, and the high scores. Raiden, low pressure, low expectations, range attacks. This is a novice who takes his time to do the right thing. Blade Raiden, high risk, speed, melee attacks. Brash, impatient, and showboating. Someone skilled whose abilities are just good enough to keep pace with the decisions he makes as long as he makes the right decisions. MGS2 Snake. He scavenges for a weapon, uses the environment, and surprises the enemy. He is an expert. He is resourceful and willing to let the enemy do most of the work and then capitalize on an opportunity that appears. Snake as Pliskin. Scavenges for a weapon, high-risk approach. This is someone aggressive who puts everything toward a narrow window of opportunity that he creates. Tuxedo Snake. He arrives lightly prepared with a weapon, he takes his time, he finishes the job with one shot, one takedown, and has zero body armor. This is somebody who survives on finesse and confidence. Finally, MGS1 Snake. He is underprepared, he uses stealth, and he improvises. He is a combination of the three snakes above. He's willing to let the enemy do his work, puts everything toward a narrow window of opportunity that he creates, and he threads the needle. He's confident enough to forego a firearm and put his body on the line.
Now, let's return to narrative design. Much of what we have reviewed is true of many, perhaps all games. You can only roleplay with restrictions, so restrictions create roleplay. But there's something here that is unique to Metal Gear Solid 2. The VR missions are a gameplay-first feature, but they carry narrative meaning because VR training plays an important role in the campaign's narrative. A story very much about differentiating between Raiden and Snake. The VR missions tell the same story through their primary purpose, to provide a variety mode with challenges that dig deep into the game's mechanics. A player gunning for a high score will learn these characters not through narration exactly, but through playing the characters.
So, with a little digging, we see that the VR missions have clear narrative substance. They differentiate meaningfully between the characters. This narrative design choice elaborates upon the longer narrative told through the campaign, and we will look at that now. We begin with content from the first game, Metal Gear Solid 1. An expansion release of Metal Gear Solid 1 featured a collection of VR missions, kind of predecessors of those in MGS2. Here's my copy bought used from Blockbuster quite some time ago, and here is my 100% complete save file from then too. During the campaign, Raiden claims that these and other VR missions trained him to perform on the battlefield like Solid Snake.
I've had extensive training, the kind that's indistinguishable from the real thing.
Like what?
Sneaking mission 60, weapons 80, advanced
VR, huh?
but realistic in every way.
A virtual grunt of the digital age, that's just great.
But he doesn't stop there. Raiden hasn't been trained to fight like Solid Snake, but as Solid Snake. Until the start of MGS2, he's even been training under Snake's codename.
And by the way, Snake, we're changing your code name for all following communication.
What's wrong with Snake?
Just a precaution. You are now designated Raiden. All right, Raiden. You've already covered infiltration and VR training.
I've completed 300 missions in VR. I feel like some kind of legendary mercenary.
Because of the MGS1 VR training, Raiden role-plays Snake so intensely that he assumes his identity.
Yeah!
Encountering the real Solid Snake, even in his disguise as Pliskin, complicates this. When Raiden and the player get gameplay tips from Snake, he'll call attention to the limitations of VR training.
Use your head. They can't see those claymore mines either, even if they did the planting, so they need to keep a mine detector handy.
I wouldn't have thought of that. You're right.
I don't think they taught you this in all that VR training, but intuition counts for something in battle. Use your wits and senses to detect the danger. Got it? You've got yourself a remote-controlled missile. Referred to as Nikita, it's a wireless guided projectile. Unlike VR training, you won't have a bird's eye view to help you control the missile.
By criticizing VR training, Snake is criticizing Raiden's adoption of an assumed role over his actual identity. He's pointing out the limits of fantasy over reality. This critique reaches its climax when they discuss Raiden's VR experience of the tanker chapter, the prelude to Raiden's section of Metal Gear Solid 2, during which Snake presumably died, which allowed Raiden to assume the role in the first place.
I've gone through VR training of the tanker mission before.
Yeah? Well, I doubt it accurately simulates the events of that mission.
Taking all of this together, we see Snake pushing Raiden to differentiate, to see himself as separate from his role, reinforced by VR. If the first step is acknowledging differentiation, the next step is treating each other as different people. The game does this by building trust between Solid Snake and Raiden through gameplay, through the player's experience. When Snake reveals his true identity, he treats Raiden as an ally and a collaborator.
Raiden, this is the Stinger missile launcher. The Kasaka can't stand up to the Harrier. You have to shoot the Harrier down.
Snake, we got company.
I'm counting on you.
Their trust develops further during the sniping section.
Raiden, you're carrying a PSG-1, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's time to play sniper.
I faced a similar situation in advanced mode level 4 VR training with the PSG-1.
VR? Guess it's better than nothing. Make sure you don't hit Emma.
If the player is having trouble, Raiden can call Snake and ask for help.
Damn, I don't think I can do this. Snake, take over for me.
I'll take care of it then. I'm going to show you how sniping should be handled. Take a good look.
Snake will then take out anything that the player observes through the scope. So there's a back and forth of support here. Their trust building reaches its climax as they fight side by side during one of the final battles. This kicks off when Snake gives Raiden a sword, a weapon that he, Snake, won't use.
Why?
Olga asked me to give it to you. Besides, I'm not a big fan of blades.
This differentiates them further, and this weapon is available as they tackle the final gauntlet together, with Snake as mentor and Raiden as mentee. Snake even becomes a source of moral support to Raiden during the button-mashing torture sequence. If the player looks at Solid Snake while Solidus chokes Raiden, the oxygen meter will deplete at a slower rate. If you'll listen, when I turn towards Snake, you'll hear the interval between the choking sound effects lengthen. And in the end, Snake helps Raiden differentiate not just from him, but from the player as well.
By the way, what is that?
Dog tags. I'll pick my own name and my own life. I'll find something worth passing on.
And this brings us full circle to the narrative design of the VR missions in Metal Gear Solid 2. Raiden has grown from the roleplay of a single character through the VR missions of MGS1, where he over-identified as Snake, to the multi-character differentiated VR missions of Metal Gear Solid 2. The player started the campaign with power over Raiden. They expected him to play like Solid Snake, and they could make choices to reinforce that. But Raiden fought his final battle with a weapon unique to him, forcing the player to conform to Raiden. In the VR missions, from every version of Raiden to every version of Snake, the reversed power dynamic is in place, as players mold themselves to fit the characters.
Congrats, Snake.
So we're approaching the end. Those of you who paid attention earlier are certainly asking, what about Naked Raiden? If you haven't played the game recently, Naked Raiden is a gimmick mode that uses a character model and restricted moveset from the campaign. Combat is a no-go, so Naked Raiden must sneak through 5 levels without getting caught. The Eliminate All missions illustrate the narrative design of the VR missions best, so I set Naked Raiden aside so we could understand what's going on generally, and now we can include him back into the whole picture. I view the character options in the VR missions through the lens of Raiden's and Snake's relationship, that of mentor and mentee. Because Raiden is the mentee, his variations are less developed versions of Snake's. MGS2 Snake is a more developed version of standard Raiden. Each one lets the enemy create an opening, though Raiden attacks from a relaxed distance, while Snake strategizes for a close range approach.
Snake.
Pliskin is a more developed version of Blade Raiden. Each takes the fight to the enemy, but Pliskin does so as a choice. He already has a gun, he doesn't need to aggress. To clear that high score, he chooses to. Whereas Blade Raiden charges in with a sense of inevitability.
Congrats, Snake.
A hallmark of youth. Tuxedo Snake is a more developed version of Naked Raiden. Both have arrived with minimal equipment. The tux has more dignity than the birthday suit, granted, but they'll stop the same number of bullets, which is 0. Snake arrived with just enough to work with, and Raiden has definitely shown up underprepared.
Congrats, Snake.
Metal Gear Solid 1 Snake has no analog in Raiden's variations because he is the sum of all Snakes. He is an integrated character. As a novice, Raiden can learn strategy, aggression, and finesse, but mastery involves integration, coordinating smaller skills together into a sum that's greater than its parts.
Congrats, Snake.
Even at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden isn't there yet, so Solid Snake remains in a league of his own, a hero without comparison. And this, for me, I think is where Metal Gear Solid 2 gives us something greater than itself. It depicts a way to consider the process of growth, how our mentors can provide models for specific skills, but they cannot provide the one thing that we must provide ourselves, which is experience, unsupervised effort, instructive failure, and, when it comes, competence, moving toward mastery. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, you can pay it forward in a few ways. Read books, make things with other people, volunteer in your community, and vote. Have a great day.